What's going on, everybody? I'm Jerry, and today we have my Week 16 power rankings going over all 32 teams, ranking them in the order. We only had a couple big movers this week, and as well as we had a lot of people stick right where they're at. All the rankings are starting to kind of align with each other, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let's like the video and let's comment. I haven't had a comment on a video in 12 videos. Somebody comments something, I reply to them, so go for it. And let's start off with the 32nd team, the Carolina Panthers. Now, they do get a win this week. They get a barely win over the Falcons. They're still 2-12. It wasn't enough for me to move them out of that spot. They still didn't play good football. They just played this much better than the Falcons. So I had to keep them at 32. They're still 2-12. So they stay at 32, Carolina Panthers. We've seen them here all season. Next, we have the New England Patriots, who lose to the Kansas City Chiefs only by 10. So closer game, but they still haven't been able to show me that they can play like consistent, competent football. I thought about moving them up a little bit, but the other teams around them, they're 3-11. There's only a couple teams that are 3-11. So they still had to stay back here for me at 31, the New England Patriots. Next we have the Chargers, who I thought I overreacted and moved them back too far, and then they lose 63-21 against the Raiders, who had not looked like an amazing football team, but in the first half, going up 42-0. In that half, they did look like an amazing team. I didn't want to move them past because they're still 5-9. I mean, their season's pretty much over, and I feel like having them at 30th is, still potentially too low. I think it's just now that they don't have their quarterback in Justin Herbert and they're just rocking with Easton Stick, their season's pretty much over, so they're probably going to hover right around that end mark. And if you have the Chargers on your schedule, you're probably getting a win. So they stay at 30. Then we have a mover. We have the Jets. I moved the Jets back 2 spots. I lost 30-0 to the Dolphins. It was not a good game whatsoever for the Jets. Weren't able to get anything going. It seems like randomly they'll just have one random week where they'll play good football. We have to remember they beat the Bills. They beat the Eagles. Like, some of their wins are against such good football teams, and very odd to me, but they move back 2 spots with a couple people moving up to 29, the New York Jets. Next, we have the Washington Commanders, 4-10. I didn't move them because they stayed in it in a game against the Rams, only losing by 8. They were in it the whole time. They were at least a competent football team, which those bottom 4 typically show that they aren't really a competent football team. Although the Panthers finally getting a win, they still only scored 9 points. But that's kind of what the bottom 4 has been reserved for. And the Commanders still play good and like have a chance to win the game football. You got to remember they were in 2 close games against the Eagles, an overtime game being one of those. So I have them at 4-10. I decided not to move them. A couple other teams kind of jumped around. Minus 142 is not good, though, especially for their record. Same with the Giants. Minus 149 plus minus, being 5-9. At 27th, I had them move back a spot. Only moving back 1 spot because although it was really bad, I still feel like, they were just getting, Tommy DeVito was just getting sacked all day long. 7 sacks, I believe, the Saints got against him. And the Saints haven't been a good football team, but I still have belief in the Saints, especially in the poor division that they're in. So I didn't move them back farther. I think I could have flipped the Commanders with them, but then I'm moving the Commanders up in a loss. So I just didn't really want to do that. I think you could make the argument for the Giants to slide back a spot, but I'm leaving them just the 1 spot back at 27. Meanwhile, the Raiders, we win 63-21 against a team, especially not scoring a point the week before. You have to move up at least a decent amount in my book. So the Raiders move up 3 spots to 26 at 6-8 too, pretty far back for 6-8, especially having a team like the Cardinals ahead of them. I struggled with this one. It's really because the Cardinals have been close in games with good teams, and they weren't necessarily super close. I did think about moving the Raiders ahead of them, but I don't like to overreact. And with the Raiders not scoring a single point the week prior and playing a Chargers team that ends up firing their coach and their GM, I couldn't move them ahead yet. I don't think the Cardinals are like a horrible bottom-tier football team. They kind of end up right along the same lines of the Commanders for me, where they can play a winnable game where they can be in it, but ultimately they're probably going to lose. So I think the Cardinals will probably slide back if they continue losing. They will. slide back farther, probably to that 28, 29 if there's a bad game, but they stick right at 25 for me. It's just they were kind of in the 49ers game at least a little bit at times, and I think the 49ers are the best team in football, so I didn't move them back. I think they could have, probably will next week, just didn't want to overreact too much to anything. Same with the Titans. You lose to, sure, a bunch of backups on the Texans. I just didn't think, again, you look at the prior team that I had the Cardinals, so I can't move the Titans past the Cardinals. If we go back again, I don't think you're moving the Titans past the Raiders. Any of these teams, I don't think you can move them back past them because, again, they're still playing competent football games. So we're going to leave the Tennessee Titans at 24. Just seems like where they need to be. Again, you get a loss in a very close game to what's been a good Texans team. Sure, they've had backups, but I leave the Titans at 24. It's where they were meant to be for me. Falcons move back 2 spots. You lose to the worst team in the league. You got to move back, and it was tough to move them back farther for the same reason. I don't know if I can move them back past the Titans. I don't think that they're worse than the Titans. I think the Titans have played bad football this year. The Falcons are still 6-8. They still have a chance in their division. So I only move them back the 2 spots. And them moving back 2 spots actually caused 2 losing teams to move up. One being the Chicago Bears, which I don't mind because the Bears played a close game against the Browns, who have been a great football team this year. Granted, the reason they didn't jump this next team is because they were playing a very injured Browns team. Browns only had 2 of their starting offensive linemen. Jerome Ford has still been the running back with Kareem Hunt, with Nick Chubb obviously being out the whole year. There was a lot of injuries on their defense. Myles Garrett did play most of the game, but he was injured last week, so there was something going on there. Just a lot of injuries. Joe Flacco threw 3 interceptions, and they still managed to win the game. I thought the team played well, and I thought it was against a good team like that. I think they were worthy of moving up anyway, so I did it. And I don't think that I can confidently have them jump the Packers yet because, again, the Packers beat them week 1. And I think, honestly, unless the Bears get a really convincing win and the Packers have another really convincing loss, in this game they lost 34-20 to the Buccaneers, who, again, I don't think very highly of, but I just couldn't confidently say that the Bears are better than the Packers yet. So I had to leave the Bears behind the Packers. Therefore, the Packers do move up in a pretty rough loss to the Buccaneers. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Pittsburgh Steelers, 20th, moving back 3 spots. They lose 30-13 to the Indianapolis Colts. Bad loss. Typically, their defense can keep them in games, and the offense can just do enough. They don't even... Well, it sounds like they know who their quarterback is now. It's going to be Mason Rudolph, but they're kind of jumping around with quarterbacks. They have Mitch Trubisky. George Pickens isn't blocking properly. The running game is just not consistent whatsoever. So a lot of problems over there, especially when the defense allows 30 points. They haven't been doing that this year. And it's to a Colts team, which I don't think people expected much, but Gardner Minshew's been slinging it. So had to move the Steelers back 3 spots in a really bad loss to the Colts back to 20. 19, Vikings, they moved back a spot. Close game against the Bengals, who have been a great football team, but it was a loss, so I felt like they had to move back. You look at the teams that I moved up, they did get wins. They also didn't play very good teams, so this one was kind of questionable for me to move the Vikings back because they also had Nick Mullins in at quarterback, who you don't really know what to think of. So I just kind of chalked it up to, you lost the game, probably could have won, so you move back. Buccaneers got a convincing win over the Packers, so I was confident in moving them up to this 18 spot at 7-7. And then this one, the Saints, it was like they beat the Giants and just sacked Tommy DeVito a bunch of time. They were doing the celebration, the Italian fingers, and so I moved them up. I thought about potentially putting the Buccaneers ahead of them, but I still think the Saints are a more well-rounded football team, and I think in a matchup they could win. We'll see what happens in that division, but I have the Saints moving up 2 spots as well to 17. The Denver Broncos. This is kind of controversial for me, and I really didn't want to move the Broncos back, but when you look at all the games of these next 4 or 5 teams that you're going to see that I put in here, the Broncos and how bad their loss was to the Lions was significant enough for me to move them back this far with how well the next 4 or 5 teams played. to warrant them having to kind of move back. I don't like to overreact to 1 week, especially when the Broncos were beating good teams like the Chiefs and the Bills. And I think there was another team that they beat that was good. But Broncos have been playing really good football, but then they get this big loss to the Lions, who had been struggling. So I do move them back 5. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. But the Seahawks beat the Eagles, who early on were a juggernaut and one of the best teams in the league. They were only barely beating teams, but look at Drew Lock over there. He was slinging that thing. He had that 92-yard touchdown drive at the end. It was huge. It was phenomenal, and they moved to 7-7, and they had to move up for me. I don't think, with the Broncos, how bad that loss was, and the Seahawks beat the Eagles, I feel like you got to move them up, so I don't think you can put the Broncos ahead of the Seahawks. Colts get a convincing win over the Steelers, who are 7-7 still, and we're a good football team, and typically their defense is the one part that plays well. In this case, their defense doesn't play well, and the Colts just dot them up and run the ball efficiently with Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson, I think his name was. I hadn't even heard of him before. So I don't think you can put the Broncos past the Colts. So 14 is the Colts. 13 is the Bengals. They get an overtime win against the Vikings, who had a very good defense. They put up 27 points, and Jake Browning's been slinging the rock all over the place. Doesn't matter. Jamar Chase in the corner here gets injured. Doesn't matter. T. Higgins comes in, makes a phenomenal play to end the game. So I feel like you have to move the Cincinnati Bengals up, and I don't think the Broncos can be ahead of them. Then the last team got the Houston Texans. They do barely get a win over the Titans. Titans aren't a great football team. They had a lot of backups in. Tank Dell's injured. Nico Collins is injured. C.J. Stroud was injured, who was supposed to be this hero, going to be MVP this year. I think this also shows that how much talent there really is around him. And not that anybody can do what he's doing, because he's been doing great things. And C.J. Stroud's been having a great season. I don't want to discredit him too much. But you were able to come in here with a Case Keenum, who hadn't started a game in, I don't remember how many years, but it was like 3 or 4 years. And he was able to win with him. So I don't want to discredit C.J. Stroud, but all the people saying he should be MVP and he's amazing, like to just hold off on that a little bit. He's going to make some mistakes. People are talking about him like he's already Patrick Mahomes. I want to lay off on that. I think the talent around him is good. I don't think he's being carried by them. I think he's doing a lot of great things. But we'll see what happens. Hopefully he can play this week. But again, I don't think he can put the Broncos ahead of the Texans. So they end up at 12. The final team, the I almost said St. Louis Rams. It's the Los Angeles Rams, as you can see. I have them moving up to 11. Sure, they're at 7-7. I get it. But their offense, 9th in points per game, 8th in yards per game. Haven't been mentioning those stats a lot. I think they're valuable still. I think the point differential is kind of inflated and overrated at this point. It works for a couple teams, but anywho, defense, 19th and 18th. They're not terrible. They played a lot of games against good football teams, and they've won some of those games. And getting a win again this week, feel like valuable enough. Move them up a spot. It was very tough between these past 5 teams to kind of differentiate and see where I wanted to put them. But I moved the Rams up 1 spot to 11. The Jaguars moved back a spot, flip-flopping with the number 9 team. They moved back. They get a loss. It was not a great game, and Trevor Lawrence was playing. So with all that being said, I thought definitely worthy of moving back a spot, especially with how well the next team played. So the Jaguars end up at 10. The Detroit Lions move up a spot to 9. Again, the 42-17 win over the Broncos. More than worthy of moving up. The Broncos have been playing great football. We already talked about them beating good teams. Lions move to 10-4. The fact that the Lions have double-digit wins, let's give them a round of applause for the Detroit Lions for 10 wins. And let's hope that they don't win another game so I can win the bet against you, Jason, who's probably watching this. I hope you are. If you are, comment on the video, Jason, because nobody's commenting on my videos. So somebody comment something on the video. I'll reply to it, I promise. Detroit Lions are at 9, plus 51 only in their point differential, despite being 10-4. But it's positive, so good for them. 5th in points per game, 3rd in yards per game on offense. It's been great. Their defense has been subpar. In this particular game, they played well. The Broncos kind of looked like the old last year or early this year Broncos. So hopefully that doesn't continue to be a trend for the Broncos. But we're talking about the Lions at number 9, moving up 1 spot and moving to 10-4 this season. Next, we have the Cleveland Browns, who I do move back in a win. They barely beat the Bears. And in this Bears game, you have 2 calls that ultimately changed the game. You also have two drops that ultimately changed the game. So you have, well, I guess it's one call, two drops. The call at right before halftime, the Bears decided to bomb the ball deep in a Hail Mary, and it was incomplete. But Justin Fields got hit probably a whole second after he threw the ball in the helmet, and it was not called roughing the passer. They were already on, I believe, the 39-yard line, but Cairo Santos, the Bears kicker, isn't really good. Anything more than 55, so it would have been a 57 or 58 yarder. So they didn't do it. If they get the roughing call, ball moves up 15 yards, they kick a field goal. This game is at least in overtime. Bears might even win. And then obviously you have the drop at the end by Darnell Mooney where he almost kind of like squeezes the ball and it just shoots right out into the defender's hand, as well as the Robert Tonyan drop. So I feel like the Browns very easily could have lost this game. And although they did have a lot of injuries going on, they still had some of their star players. You know, Joe Flacco's been a star recently. Jerome Ford has stood out in the run game despite missing, said him earlier, Nick Chubb. David Njoku has been Flacco's favorite target. Amari Cooper's still there. So a lot of talent still there. Offensive line was beat up. The defense was banged up too. But the Browns should have had a more convincing win, in my opinion, against a lower tier, not bottom tier, approaching mid-tier Bears team. So the Browns move back one spot to 8 at 9-5, looking great for them. Number 7, the Philadelphia Eagles, another one of the biggest movers, moving back 3 spots. You lose to the Seahawks, who have been a very mid team and probably a bottom half team in these past few weeks. But Drew Lock, the fact that he was able to execute a 92-yard drive with 1 minute left on this Eagles defense just goes to show how bad they are. My friend Chris made a good point that a big reason that the Eagles are struggling on defense is because of how quick how quick the offensive drives have been. A lot of either 3 and outs or very, not really on the field very often, and even some quick touchdowns, which obviously help, but it tires out your defense. So I think their defense is very mid, but the numbers end up being, bottom tier just because of how much time their defense does spend on the field. Even the Eagles in this particular game, they did win the time of possession, but that was because their first drive was 8.5 minutes long. So other than that, very short drives, defense is on the field a lot of time, and therefore the offense can play as well as they want, but the defense has not been able to get it done. So they have to move back 3 spots at 10-4, only plus 18 point differential. I think it matters for this team too, the point differential. Plus 18 at 10-4 is not good. Kansas City Chiefs stay put at 6. I don't think that you can put the Eagles ahead of the Chiefs, especially with this recency bias and all these losses from the Eagles. And I don't think you can put the Chiefs ahead of any of these teams coming up. They played the Patriots and only won by 10 to Zappe, who's basically a backup quarterback. And they didn't do anything outstanding to amaze me to move them up in the rankings. So the Chiefs for now just stay at 6. I think they could make it back into the top 5. But it is going to be tough to mess with these top 5 teams. 5 being the Buffalo Bills, who their offense points per game and yards per game have been like right around 5-6 or lower the whole year. Couple bad losses and make them 8-6. They've also been able to blow out good teams. This week, you beat a great team. You move up in my power rankings 3 spots. So they're plus 125 in the point differential. Crazy that the 2 spots away in the 7th spot is the Eagles at plus 18 with a 10-4 record. We talked about last year the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a positive point differential with like a 4-7 record, or I think he even carried on to the end of the season. Meanwhile, the Vikings were 13-4 and almost negative in the point differential. So that's why we put that on there. It is still important, but the Buffalo Bills getting a big win, move up 3 spots to 5th. I think well deserved. Miami Dolphins just stomp the Jets, and I don't really think the Jets are very worthy of. I didn't think it was worthy of. I didn't think it was a great win. It was the Jets at the end of the day. They've been a horrible football team. Sure, they shut them out, and that's big too because their offense has been, the best part of their team being ranked first in points per game and yards per game for most of the season. I think the big part is the defense kind of showing out and stopping a Jets team that was able to produce in recent weeks at least a little bit. But it wasn't enough for me yet. I still haven't been confident enough to move them to 3 past the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I know the Cowboys just lost to the Bills. I don't like to overreact to 1 week. So if the Cowboys have another bad loss or maybe get a close win against a bad team, they'll probably move back behind the Dolphins and potentially even the Bills too, especially. You're very tempted to move the Dolphins up to 3, Bills to 4, Cowboys to 5 because of the win, but I couldn't do it. I'm not going to overreact to it. I'm going to leave the Cowboys where they're at. I still think that their defense has been one of the best in the league, although having a rough week this week. They did also just beat the Eagles, the week prior. And then the offense has actually been like the shining star this year, aside from like Micah Parsons making some big plays in the backfield and the guy his name is slipping my mind, Deron Bland, who's getting all the pick sixes this year. So Cowboys stay put at 3, and so do the other 2 teams that are going to stay at the top. It's seeming like the script is going to be true. We've gone over this every week. We don't need to talk about it. The Baltimore Ravens just continue to shine in the 2 spot, and the 49ers just kind of stomp on the Cardinals. Fairly convincing win, a few score, so worthy of it in my opinion. They stay at 1. Plus 191 point differential is wild. I believe the 49ers were like 5-3 too, so big six game win streak for them, which is huge. But San Francisco 49ers stay in that 1 spot. It's going to be tough for them to move. I think the Ravens could take it over if the 49ers have a bit too close of a game, or if the Ravens stomp out a bad team. But looking at it again, we talked about from this whole 11 to 16 range where the Rams, Texans, Bengals, Colts, Seahawks all win games, and it's either a close game against a decent team, a convincing win over a good team, or the Rams case, it's just beating the Commanders, but Texans is just beating the Titans. The Bengals is just beating they're all beating teams that are bottom tier except the Eagles, but the Seahawks have also looked horrible in all their weeks prior, so I didn't want to overreact about them. I don't think they were worthy of causing one of those winning games to not move up. So I think if, one of those Rams, Texans, Bengals, Colts has a bad game, I could see if the Seahawks win again, they could jump them. But that's pretty much where that's at. And then, again, we talked about the Giants could possibly move them back behind the Commanders. It didn't feel right to move the Commanders up in a loss, although they did look like a more competent team than the Giants this week. If I was to change it, I'd probably flip those around. I'd also probably put the Raiders ahead of the Cardinals, but the Cardinals, they fought at least and were able to put up some points and do something against the 49ers. That's why I ultimately didn't move them. But it was a really close call for me. But that's going to do it for the video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, especially comment. Let's comment on the video and subscribe, and then share the video. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers. We're really close. We're at 73. It's been a very slow progression, but 100 would be huge. I'd love to see a 3rd digit. Share it with your friends, your family, whoever. And then thank you for watching, and have a great day.